My sister went missing February 2009.
My name is Michael A. Fulton, and I am a detective with the Washington, D.C. Police Department assigned to the Major Case Cold Case Unit.
When Pam went missing, I believe I was an assistant chief for investigative services.
We went. She was supposed to meet her mom for a Valentine's Day lunch or dinner, and she didn't show.
Mother was alarmed right away. However, Pam had just met Jose, and I didn't really take it serious. I said, well, they had just got together. Maybe they wanted to go out and have a really nice Valentine's Day, and that. We were not sure that she was actually missing until Tuesday. Later on that evening, my mother called me and she said, Dirk, she said, I'm going to go up to Pam's house. And I said, okay, well, I'll meet y'all over there. My mother, my nephew, and my youngest sister went to Pam's house. And before I could get there, they called me and they said, Dirk, you need to get here. Something isn't right.
Key pieces of evidence, when they went into the home, there was some bed sheets that were missing.
One of the first things they noticed was Pam was very particular with like how she kept her window shades. And in the cities, a lot of people have window shades that you can either pull up, that come up, or they come down from top to bottom or bottom to up. And when they came in, the one window shade was pulled down, and it was different from the rest of them, and it wasn't the way that Pam normally kept her window shade.
And where that window was, there were no cameras to cover that side of her house. It covered everything else but that side of her house. And nothing was torn up, didn't look like a fight or anything. But she had some papers, and they were not thrown across her office. They were just laid on the floor, and they were in order. But if you know Pam, she wouldn't leave things like that. We were sitting around talking, and I asked, I said, does anybody have Jose's number? And my nephew said, yeah, I have it. So I called him. He answered the telephone, and I told him, I said, Jose, this is Derek, Pam's brother. And he said, yeah. He said, I haven't heard from her either. He said, we actually broke up Friday, and I've been trying to get in touch with her. What happened? He said, we broke up, and I left. I said, okay. So I asked him, I said, can I come and see you? I said, where do you live? He told me his address. He lived in Virginia. And the reason I wanted to do that, because I know my sister. I felt like if he had done something to her, that she would fight him. And he was light-skinned, and I said, if he has any scratches on him or anything, I know something is wrong. I was trying to get a reaction out of him to see if he was going to show me that he had a temper or he had did something. He didn't react to any of it. This is real serious to me. I said, and you really don't have any options. I said, I need you to take your clothes off and let me look at you. So he did it with no problem. I mean, no hesitation, didn't hesitate. He just did it. And that almost assured me that he hadn't done anything. He just seemed normal, like he was genuinely concerned about what was going on with Pam. And he said, Derek, if there's anything I can do to help you all, he said, I want to do it. He said, I don't know what happened. He said, everything just went amiss all of a sudden. He was really puzzled about it, and that he loved her. And that didn't mean anything to me at that time. He said he loved her. But when I told the police that, it meant something to them. They said he was talking in past tense, so he knew something was wrong. My mother, my sister, and my nephew were continuously calling me. And I finally answered the telephone, and they said, Dirk, the surveillance system, you'll know something is wrong. So I said, well, what are y'all seeing?
I want to say he came over on the 12th. On the 13th, Pam had actually sent a text and had a phone call, and I want to say they were work-related. So Pam's phone, when they were checking the location of the phone, was at her residence. This is shortly after she was murdered. Next thing you know, it was at his residence. Now, this is her phone, which was never recovered.
He wrote a letter and left it on my sister's desk. And it said, he said, I've been trying to find you and talk to you. I'm really missing you. We need to talk. And pretty much if there's anything that I can do to help you or help us get back together, please reach out to me.
Then at one point, I think during the day, you can see like the mailman comes, delivers some mail, and she opens the door, gets the mail. And I think later on that night, you can see Jose coming into her house.
And then you never see Pam come out again.
Called the police and told them that my sister was missing.
Within 24 hours, the homicide unit, the fresh case homicide unit, they responded. Like we didn't smell bleach, you didn't smell cleaning materials, you didn't see things that were that looked like there was some sort of obvious cleanup that would be indicative of somebody trying to clean up a crime scene.
In that window that we talked about where the shade was drawn up, there was a piece of a plastic bag in that window to indicate somebody was going in and out of that window, with a plastic bag. As they found peculiar was the fact that her car, by all accounts, again, she would keep her cover on her Jaguar, and the cover was off. It was in the garage, and the windows were all down.
There was food in the refrigerator. She still had medicines. It didn't look like, this was somebody that was gonna walk away from the life.
When they brought a canine in, they brought in what's called a cadaver dog, and a cadaver dog will hit on a deceased person's body. If a deceased person has been in a particular location, then the dog will hit on that area. And the dog did alert inside of Pam's car and inside the garage area, I want to say on 2 or 3 occasions. So again, that's another kind of thread of probable cause.
And unlike most people of color, when we go missing, I called the news and they picked it right up.
And he, relatively early in the investigation, a detective searched his car and his home.
He's saying that the police that did the search warrant didn't take the clothes that he was wearing. I was livid. I called the police. I called the detective, Brian Castle, and I told him that. He didn't confirm it one way or the other. He assured me that they were working on the case, but he would not answer the question whether they had taken the clothes that he had. The very next day, they go back and do another search warrant. I don't know who it was, and this is kind of funny to me now. With his clothes sitting in the middle of the floor, they took some contents out of his refrigerator, milk and juice, and just let it waste on all of his clothes. So I found out about the search warrant, and I wanted to talk to him again because if there's a search warrant, to me it says you have something. The police has something.
He left some stuff on the phone. He would call the phone saying, leaving messages on her answer machine, implying that trying to establish a timeline for himself, and I think also trying to establish a timeline that Pam may have been there or Pam may have been alive.
I called Jose again and I told him, I said, man, is there something you want to tell me? I said, we need to talk again. I go back to his house. I told the detective that I was going back to his house, and they said, well, if you go to his house, see if you can get him to agree to a polygraph test. I go back to his house and I said, you told me that you would help. I'm hearing that the police want to give you a polygraph test and you're not agreeable to it. He said, yeah, man, those things don't mean anything. And, I'm innocent, so I don't see why I should do that. I said, well, it'll help the police, it'll help me, and it'll let the police know that you hadn't done anything. Then they can start looking at other people. So we talked about it for a few minutes, and he finally said, well, I'll do it. So I said, okay, well, let me call them. So I called Brian Castle. He was the lead detective on the case at the time. I called him, and I told him, I said, I'm here at Jose's house, and I'm talking to him. And he said he'll do the polygraph test. So I got off the telephone, and I told him, I said, man, it's kind of late. Why don't we get together tomorrow and do the polygraph test? And he said, okay. He said, well, I have to go to work. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. I said, what time do you get off work? And he told me the time, told me where he worked at. And I said, okay, well, I'll come to you. Well, he said, okay. And I said, well, do you have a way of getting there? He said, no, the police took my car. He says, I don't have a way. I said, well, I'll come to your job and pick you up. I went to his job. I picked him up. We're in traffic. And all of a sudden, he opens the door and jumps out the car. And just as I was pulling over, he comes running back towards the car. And he said, man, I had to go to the bathroom. I couldn't hold it. I had to go to the bathroom. But he wasn't gone long enough to go to the bathroom. Mm-hmm. At that point, I felt like that he'd had something on him that he wanted to get rid of. But he ran behind some stores and houses and came back. So we get up to the violent crimes unit. They take him in. About 2 hours later, another detective comes out the building, and he comes over to the car running, and he knocks on the window of the car. And I look up, and I see this detective. His name was Danny Welling. And he says, Dirk, he said, Jose wants to talk to you before he takes the polygraph test. I'm pretty sure he's going to confess. And he said, don't react to it. Don't do anything. Just, listen to him. Let him talk. So I go back in there and I said, Jose, I said, what's going on? They're telling me that you don't want to take the polygraph test. You want to talk to me before you take it. And he said, yeah. He said, man, I'm not going to do the test. Then they have him strapped up at this point, things around his chest, on his arms, and things like that. And he's sitting in a chair. And he said, I'm not going to do it. I said, what do you mean you're not going to do it? He said, well, they took my keys to my car, and they tore up my house. I said, okay. I said, well, I told you before I will help you put your house back together. And I said, what is this thing about the keys? I said, you don't have your car, so why do you need the keys to your car? You don't have your car. Well, in mine, I want the keys to my car. So I looked over at the police. They said, we're not going to give him the keys to his car. We're going to keep the keys to his car till we finish doing what we need to do. Well, when they said that, he just flipped. I mean, you saw a different Jose. He started cursing and just going off and talking about telling the police, y'all don't know who y'all effing with. I will kill you all. I'll kill all of you mothers in here. And one of the detectives said to him, they said, oh, so you've killed people.
It's the investigators that he had killed people in the military, and then he said he was in parts of the world that he was never in.
He starts pulling at the equipment that they had on him. They told him, they said, no, don't pull it off. We'll take it off of you, but don't pull it off. We'll take it off of you. And he's still cursing and fussing and going back and forth. And he gets up and he starts walking out. So I'm walking out behind him. The police said, Mr. Butler, don't follow him. Let us talk to you for a minute. So he walks on outside of Violent Crimes Unit. He's standing out there. Say that he had called somebody. So when after I talked to them, talked to the police, and it didn't take me no more than about 5 minutes or so. And I go outside, and he's standing out there, and he said, "You want to give me a ride home?" I said, "No, I'm not going to give you a ride home." I said, "You didn't do what you said you were going to do. You didn't hold your part of the bargain up. So no, I'm not going to give you a ride home." So the police come out there, and I guess they came out there because they thought that something would happen between me and him. And when the police came out there, he started threatening them again and telling them what he would do. And they said, "Look, if you don't quiet down, we're going to arrest you for disorderly conduct." And he said, "I don't care nothing about going to jail." And they didn't arrest him, but he kept getting loud and telling the police what he was going to do. And they said, "Well, we'll give you a ride home." He said, "No, I don't want y'all to give me a ride home." So he left, and he started walking away from Violent Crimes Unit, going back towards the Virginia side. And I stayed there, and I talked to the police, and they said, "Derek, he definitely done something. We don't know what he done, but he done something." I mean, we could look at his reaction, the way that he was acting, how nervous he was when we hooked the polygraph up to him. He definitely done something.
And so you don't have a body, so you can't say with certainty that she's dead. We all believed that she was. And so, it sounds like you got a lot there to charge somebody, and this is the frustrating part for investigators. The threshold of probable cause, particularly for a murder, can be challenging. And so he would always, particularly around her anniversary of when she went missing, he would make sure that it got out there in the news. So he was an advocate for his sister in a very dramatic way. But
Else. And they assigned probably about 6 or 7 different detectives to the case in the course from 2009 until 2017. But in the meantime, I'm holding prayer vigils every year around the same time. Well, around the same time that Pam went missing. I talked to him, and I told him, I said, "Chief Newsham," I said, "you told me that in 7 years you could do something different." And I said, "We're there." And I said, "You told me that." I said, "What are the different things that you're going to do?" I said, "You promised me that you would do it."
Have to do when you haven't located a body that has been murdered is you have to get a declaration of death from the courts. And in Washington, D.C., you actually have to wait 7 years before you can get that declaration. It was actually when Mike Fulton, the detective who eventually closed the case, when he took over the case, this case started to really make some significant progress.
I think it was 2014. It was my understanding the case was originally assigned to the homicide unit, to the fresh homicide, meaning when the detectives came out, when the officers came out to take a missing person report, I think very quickly they realized, okay, something's not right here. And I'm not sure, but I think then it went to a detective and cold case. And I think from talking to Derek, it went to several detectives, and it ended up with Mitch Cradle. And Mitch Cradle was a detective assigned to the cold case unit. And I think he was being transferred from the cold case unit to the a sexual assault unit. And when he was transferring out is when the case got transferred to me. When I review everything and what I was told when I got the case, they were like, "Hey, Mike, like, just to let you know, like, this guy Derek, he's kind of he's a thorn. Like, he's not going to take no for an answer. He has a direct line to the chief, and he can be difficult to deal with." And they were like, "Are you sure you have the right temperament to deal with him?" I'm like, "Well, yeah. I mean, whatever, I got it." So
sad to say, I didn't think that he was going to do anything. He was a big guy. Just didn't seem to me like he had it. And so they introduced me to him. Me and him talked, and they stepped out. The official stepped out, and me and him was sitting in there talking. And he said, "Well, Derek," he said, I promise you, I'm going to work on this case, and I'm going to find out what happened to your sister." And I'm saying to myself, yeah, well, I've heard this before. And then he says to me, he says, "You have a bad reputation here in the police department." I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "But I don't care about that." I said, "I just want some results." So he says, "Well, I have to ask you this. Did you do anything to your sister?" And that was a real turnoff for me.
It gets a lot of attention. You'll get tips in. And one of the things when you're establishing probable cause, you have to eliminate suggestions that other people are involved. So one of the tips that came in was that Derek was involved, and
Some information early on that somebody had phoned a tip in or texted a tip in that Derek, could have. He stood to gain financially from Pam's disappearance or death.
My sister and myself had a apartment building together. We just bought the apartment building in August of 2008. February 2009, less than 6 months later, she goes missing. Then there were some other things. When we bought the apartment building, I got a will. Well, Pam said to me, she said, "Derek, we need to get wills in the event that something happens to one of us." Pam wasn't married, and I was not married at the time. Pam didn't have any kids, and I didn't have any kids. And she said, "Derek, if something happens to one of us, Ma's too old to handle the things that we have going. So I'm going to leave everything that I have to you." And I said, "Well, vice versa. I'll leave everything that I have to you."
Somebody phoned in this thing that you could be a potential suspect, and we got to deal with it. Because in order for me to get to where I got to go to prove who did it, I also got to be able to prove who didn't do it. I couldn't imagine what it, to be on the other side of that conversation, how that must be.
And then, like I said, the detectives were able to quickly determine that he wasn't involved, which is, and that's the thing some people don't understand about police work. That is something that the investigator had to do. Lied to the family about he had told, I want to say, 3 family members the same story, that on the 12th of February that it was the last time he had seen Pam, and the video indicated otherwise. And
later on that night, you can see at nighttime we talked about the motion sensors, but you can see him. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. He comes out, and you can see him like he's pacing in the yard, and then you can see him leaving later on, and then over the next couple of days, you see him coming back and forth to the house, getting stuff, leaving with a trash bag full of stuff, just various items, but you never see Pam after that. Other things, and I think Jose had said he had like one key to get into the gate.
We felt like Pam would not have given him a set of keys at that point. But you never know what, people would do.
He would always enter the home with what appeared to be a single key in his hand. And then after the 13th, he was seen using the keys, which had something dangling from it.
Detective Fulton noticed that the keys that Jose had were not the same set of keys that he was using when he first started going in and out of Pam's house. This set of keys had a big ring on it and a couple of more keys hanging from it. When he initially was going in and out of Pam's house, he had one single key.
When Pam would come in, she had her keys, and she'd open up everything and go in, and you could see the night that Jose came, he used the one key to get in, and but then, that night he comes out and he's pacing around, and the lights don't come on. Like when you see him come back after that, I think on one of the things I'm slowing. This is all black and white, and you're slowing it down. You're watching. You can see him pull the keys out, and you see him put it in. You're like, there's something dangling right there. So you go back and watch it again, and then like you can see like, well, he's got a keychain in his hand, and there's stuff dangling from it. Well, so now you're like, well, Pam's missing her keys. He says he only has one key, one key. So it's like, oh wow, so he's got Pam keys. So it's just another thing you can sort of add on to that.
To be able to pick that up, you would have to look at that video multiple times. If you can think about, the difference between just having a single key and having a key with something dangling from it. The other thing he picked up from probably hours, and he'll tell you this better than I can.
And like at one point, you see, like from one of the camera angles on the front porch, you can see like when headlights would come into, if somebody was like pulling into the driveway or a certain way that a car was coming down the street, you could see headlights. So you're watching to try to get timing of when cars would come or this or that, and then like, wait a second, did somebody just come on the front porch? And you're looking, then you can see like a reflection in the in the screen door of her glass door of like you can see somebody like starting to come up, and you can kind of make out the clothing, and I think it was like a brown sweatsuit, and it was it was a sweatsuit like when he came in a couple of days earlier, he was wearing that sweatsuit. It's like, well, why is he? So it's like you start seeing all these things, and it was the most fascinating thing to me. The images never changed, the video never changed, but the more information you got, like it just like you could see more, and it was fascinating to me, like how many times I watched that video, and there's probably at least 30 different times where you would see something that you didn't see the previous 10, 15, 20 times. One of the, like when I talk about the motion sensors, like you could see when the cameras were working and when Pam was alive, at nighttime, anytime somebody came in the backyard, anytime there was this stupid cat that would keep coming in the backyard, and the lights would come on and off. So but you're like, I'm literally watching this for hours, boom, on and off. Because every time it comes on, you're like, okay, what is? You're looking for something, like, oh, it's a cat, and then at one point, after Pam is missing, like I see the cat, and I'm like, lights didn't come on, and then it was like, holy God, wow, the lights didn't come on. So then you go back and you're watching. So then you see when the night that we think the stuff happened, you see Jose go in, and you see the lights come on, and he goes in with the keys, and but then when you see him come back out later on that night, and he's pacing around, the lights don't come on. So you're like, oh wow, like boom, we're on to something. And I had this whiteboard where I'd start to write all this stuff down. It was a dry erase board, and I would. When I had everything together, like when I had the puzzle solved, I remember like, look at the whiteboard, don't you see it?
Come to find out, this guy had murdered his previous wife about 20 years before that, back in 1989.
We were aware that Jose was married once before. Our researches, we discovered that he was connected to a woman, Marta, in like 1990, but like from 1990 on, she just didn't like where the heck was she at?
He married another girl that lived in Arlington, Virginia, or Alexandria, I forget exactly which one, but in Virginia. He married another girl while he was still married to his wife, Marta Rodriguez. He married her first, and then he married this other lady. And Marta knew about it, but he was constantly beating her up and telling her, that she couldn't leave him, that she wasn't going to leave him, and if nobody could have her, if he couldn't have her, nobody would.
And so, we started doing a little bit of research on her. Then we were able to figure out that, she was like, they were married, and that there was a report on file where he had kidnapped her and like brutally raped her, and she had escaped. Like they were in a car together. Like after he held her overnight and did terrible things to her, he put her in a car, and then she was able to jump out and run away.
This officer in Virginia sees Jose dragging this woman down the street, and this officer, he's a big guy. This guy's about 6'6", probably about 280 something pounds, and he runs over there and he grabs Jose. Jose puts up a fight, and the officer tells him, he said, "You're not going to win." So he stops and watches screaming and hollering, telling the police, he's going to kill me, he's going to kill me. They arrest Jose.
They say and found, the tools of his trade. I think they found like some duct tape in there and a knife, and so he was locked up, and he had like a preliminary hearing date that was like maybe 10, 14 days out from there, and then
all of a sudden, Marta goes missing. The family reports her missing.
We see that at this point there was a detective from Alexandria Police Department that was helping us out, Detective Ortiz, and she was able to like find in her system that the missing person report that was filed for her had been taken out of the system. That they had done a check on her name and found out that like she had an address in Florida, and they had went to the address on Florida, and like they had knocked on the door, and whoever answered the door, they were like, "Hey, are you Marta?" "Oh yeah, I'm Marta." So okay, Marta's been found, so they cleared out the system. And of course, later on, we found out that
He gives her sister, the second wife's sister, the first wife's identity. He said, take this birth certificate, social security number, and everything, and you can use it. This is from my first wife. She's not going to need it. So to cover that up, he says, she's hanging around with some drug dealers. She stays drugged up, so she's not going to need this, any of this ID. So the second wife's sister uses this ID for years. I mean, we're talking probably 8 to 10 years she's using this ID.
Oh, wow.
Well, so now when she goes to apply for a driver's license, it comes up she's missing. So, but she's in Florida now, not in the DMV area. She's in Florida. Police does very little. They get in contact with her, and she said, "No, well, I'm really not missing." She said, "I just wanted to get away from my husband, and I wanted to make sure I stayed off the grid, so to speak. So I didn't use any of my IDs, but now it's, I wanted to get a license, and so now I'm using it." They don't contact her, make physical contact with her or anything. They takes all this stuff over the phone and says, "Okay, well, we just cleared a missing persons case." So he calls her, and she tells him she don't want to talk to him. And of course, he can't make her talk to him. And he calls Florida police, and he says, go over there and see her, see if you can convince her to talk to you. They tell him what's going on. They said she won't talk to us. She doesn't want to talk to us. And he's just sitting around the office, and he's mad. Mm-hmm. And he says, and then he tells them, he says, "Send me a picture of her." He said he don't know why he asked for this picture, but he just wanted a picture of her. They sends him a picture. He looks at the picture. He looks at the ID he has when Marta first went missing, and he looks at it. He said, "This is not even close. This is not her. It's not close to being her." So he calls them back, and he says, "Tell her that she better call me." She called him. And he told her, he said, the gig is up. He said, I know you're not Marta. He said, I don't care who you are at this point. I want to know what you know about Jose.
Yeah, and so then it was, you know, all that like all this actually happened relatively quick. Once the one thread became unraveled, it all just poured out like it just, between the stuff on the video and the stuff with Marta, her being missing, and the reports, and then we were able to figure out that she had a son named. We were doing all this is all through like computer sort of searches. We were like, okay, we think this guy Hansel might be her son. And I remember me and my wife we were about ready to go on vacation to I think we were going to Barbados, and I was at the airport. Our planes were. I think all this was happening right before we were supposed to go to Barbados, and we were at the airport, and maybe the planes were running late or something. But I was like, well, let me just cold call this guy. So I called Hansel and I said, hey, I'm Detective Fulton from DC Police Department. Like, this may be like a really strange question, but did you have a mother named Marta who went missing in 1990? And he was like, yeah, I did. Kind of goes into the story about his dad Jose and the relationship, and this is all happening. He's telling me about the abuse that is just how abusive his dad was, and he was telling me a story. His dad had gotten remarried, and at one point his dad was screaming and yelling at his wife, Hansel's stepmother, and that he was going to kill her, and he said my dad was in such a rage, and like I thought he was going to kill me, and I ran upstairs to go hide, and I went into it, like he had this room I wasn't supposed to go into, when I go in there, and there's like this note. I don't even know why I saw it. I don't know what attracted me, but like drew my attention to it, and I looked down on it. It was like. I said something like, I, Jose, am responsible for Marta's disappearance. Dad's gonna, kill my stepmom and kill me, and then kill himself like some, and so he's telling me all this, and mind you, like this point to like, hey, you come board the plane, and I'm like, babe, so I board the plane. So the whole time in Barbados, trying to enjoy this vacation, I'm like, I gotta get back and go deal with this stuff. So yeah, it was. And then we were able to, bring Hansel in and talk to Hansel. And it was with the bosses, or even with the attorney's offices, of like building this case of, hey, I got the evidence, let's go. And I'm thinking, hey, like, we're ready to go. And they're like, well, Mike, there's no body, there's no evidence, we don't have a smoking gun, and I think it's like everybody, because people don't really deal with these that often, there's no true understanding of like, there's really no blueprint on how to get there. And everybody, has somebody been missing 7 years, all this other kind of stuff that is really, it's nonsense. It doesn't mean anything, because they're all things that we've perceived to be challenges, and it's like it's not that complicated to me. It's like, man, 2 went in, 1 went out. We have all this other stuff. Okay, I know we don't have a body. I know we don't have blood or a gun, but the citizens of the District of Columbia, they're not stupid. Like, jurors aren't stupid. Like we just gotta present the case, and sort of, although it's all circumstantial, like people will get it.
In April 2017, now he's only been on the case at this point 2 or 3 months, no more than 3 months, somewhere inside of 2 months, but before 3 months. He calls me one night, and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone rings. I look down at the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I've never gotten a phone call from him that time of morning. And I said, this is it. They're sitting outside my house to arrest me. And I answered the telephone. He said, do you know who this is? I said, yes, Detective Fulton. And he said, where are you? I said, I'm at home. And I'm getting ready to get up and go look out the windows. I'm sure the police are sitting outside my house. And it was the best feeling that I've ever had in my life. Felt like, I had gotten somewhere. And then, just like now, I teared up and I talked to him, and he told me, he said, we got him. And I asked him, I said, why did you play with me like that? It asked me, where was I at? He never gave me an answer to it. He said, well, we got him. He said, we got him.
It was a good phone call. It was probably not my most professional phone call. To be able to hear somebody, him and his family have been searching for answers for so long, and to, although we had answers, he didn't have anything, to be able to tell him, hey, we got him, and now that we got him, we're in a position now to be able to tell you more of the answers. It was very fulfilling.
So from 3 o'clock in the morning to probably 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm up. I'm constantly getting phone calls from chief of police, excuse me,
You're fine.
the prosecutor, Deborah Sines. I talked to her, and she said, and you thought we weren't doing anything. I said, yeah, I really did. I said, I apologize to all of y'all. I have to stop for a minute. Again, I apologize. And me and Deborah's Sines, we were like oil and water. I mean, we just couldn't. She couldn't stand me, and I couldn't stand her. But she would talk to me and tell me, things that she could tell me about the case, which I said was nothing. She was very responsive when I would call, but never really telling me, anything that I didn't know. And then all of a sudden, I won't say all of a sudden, but then it kind of shifted. And now instead of the police department and the Justice Department calling me, the news started calling me. Then I get a phone call from the mayor, and she wanted to talk to me and tell me that they had solved the case. And I want to say something about that, and I really hope that this makes the cut. Me and the mayor didn't really have a really good relationship because I felt like she could have done more. But she did all that she could do in that case. She really did. And it kind of bothers me now that I coined her as not doing what, all that she could do. So then they called me back and they said, we want to do a news conference, or can you come down? I said, on my way.
When we were putting all this case together, we were able to, all the information as related to Marta's disappearance and we believe murder, we had brought in a bunch of witnesses. We had, a ton of information that Jose killed her, and we had, we have the evidence sort of to prove it. We were also able to figure out that there was another victim out there that he had kidnapped and raped and sexually abused her, and was probably going to kill her, but only by the grace of God it didn't happen. And this happened in Virginia.
Later on, so he actually confessed to the killing. We never actually went to court. Well, never actually had a trial. Mm-hmm. He confessed. He'll take a plea bargain for 10 years. And I said, absolutely not. I said, all the work I've done? I said, no. They come back in, I said 20. They come back and we go back and forth. So we get it down to 12 years.
You know, this guy was a monster. Like, why would why would the plea be so? Again, a lot of people sometimes think it was kind of lenient, and I think what Derek and what Thelma, Pam's mom, had always said, like the number one priority for them was that they wanted to bring Pam home. They wanted to find Pam, bring her home. And then it was they wanted answers, and then it was like hold the person accountable. Hold the person. So we're balancing all that. Jose, we lock Jose up. He wants to plead guilty. He's going to agree to take us to the body. So we have the conversations with Derek about, hey, this is what's going on, and this is probably what we're going to do. Nobody likes it. Like, nobody likes, hey, offering anybody type of plea, but what he's willing to do is to bring us to where Pam is. And
a place where we can't get her because it's under a highway that has been built.
so we meet with him, and he tells us where the body is, and it's 95 up. We go out there, and of course 95 in 1990 was a 4-lane highway, 2 going one way, 2 going the other way, and of course now it's 5 lanes one way, 5 lanes. We realized everything had sort of had changed. That when you talk about the most difficult thing with this case was actually when Jose took us up there, and we're looking around, and he does that. Then we go back up there to do the search, and we have it's like 50 of us up there, and we have all these dogs and all this equipment, all this stuff, and the dogs are sort of running around, and they're alerting all over the place, like, hey, when I say the dogs, we have cadaver dogs, but it became abundantly clear that being able to recover her, we wouldn't be able to do it.
But then you're talking about 8 years later. And I knew at that point that we probably wasn't going to find much of a body, but I thought we would find something. At the time when it happened, it wasn't an HOV lane there. When we went back to search for her 8 years later, they had put an HOV lane in. And I had already been warned that we probably wouldn't find anything.
And that the most difficult thing was because Derek had came, but Derek was down like at the next probably mile marker or something, and I think he was up on a overpass watching. Like, we knew he was there, and that was the longest ride back, because I was talking to Derek on the phone from there, and I was like, hey, just meet me back at the office. That was the longest ride back to have to tell him that, look, we found her, but we're not gonna be able to recover. I remember this family's been through so much, and this is how it's gonna end. Like, she's there, but we can't get her. I mean, that's like, what do you do with that? And then I just remember Derek was like, Mike, it's okay. It's okay. Like, I appreciate everything. And I was just like I'm supposed to be giving him something, right? I'm supposed to be like answering his questions and taking his pain or the family's pain and all this stuff. And it was just kind of like it was bizarre, because it was almost in that moment, he was like I'm sure he's devastated, but he was like, but Mike, it's okay. Like, you did everything you could. Like, it's okay. And he's like, they had found some remains out here, and and I don't know what happened with that. And then I remember turning to my sergeant, like, I wonder if that's Marta. And so that was just kind of a sort of a weird thing.
During his confession, Deborah Sines, like I said, she's a handful, heck of a prosecutor. She's talking to him, and she wants to find out what happened, why it happened, and what he did. And he says to her, well, Pam called me over to her house on that Friday. She calls me over to the house to break up with me, but I don't know that that's what she wants to do. He said, I go over there, and, she just berates me and calls me all kind of names and tells me she don't want to be bothered with me anymore. And, he said they sat there and talked for about an hour, and then he said he snapped. He said he turned around and hit her, knocked her to the ground, and he blacked out for a moment. And when he come to, he's standing over top of her, choking her. But what I know about Jose and what we know about him now, that was self-serving. He came to, he was standing over top of her, choking her, and she was already gone. And then he starts panicking, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do, how he's going to get rid of this body, how he's going to get rid of her. So we go to court. He takes the plea bargain, and the judge gives him the 12 years. And the judge actually stopped the case and asked me, he said, Mr. Butler, are you satisfied with the 12 years? Are you sure you want to do it? And I said, yeah, I want to do it. But I'm hearing a lot of chatter about Virginia's going to get him. D.C. kind of assured me, without telling me, that Virginia's going to get him. So I took the plea bargain, and they give him 12 years, and the case is supposed to be over with, but I'm watching for Virginia to get him. I think about 6 months later, I don't remember whether it was Deborah Sines or Michael Fulton that called me, but they said, Virginia's not doing a thing about this case. And they know that they've called me that I'm going to get fired up and I want to do something. Now I have to start it all over again because 12 years is not enough for killing my sister. We're going to have to do something to get Virginia to do what they're supposed to do. And again, I said I was blessed with the media. I get there, and I'm a stickler for time, so I told them what time I was going to be there. I forget what time, but I'm there probably an hour early, and I'm sitting out in the parking lot. Then all of a sudden, I see one station pull up, another station pull up, and all four of them pulls up. So we stand out in the parking lot, and we're right in front of Eric Olson's office, and I'm sure that somebody said there's something going on out there, and I know that he knew that it was me at that point. So they interviewed me outside, and they asked me, so what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go in there and demand justice for Marta and my sister. And I said, he's probably going to have me locked up because I'm not going to leave until he does something. And they said, well, okay, let's go. So we walked to the Commonwealth's attorney's front door, and at the front door, it's a glass door, but it's signs there, and one of the signs say, no audio or video equipment allowed. So I get to the door, I read the sign, and I turn around and I tell everybody, I said, I don't think y'all can go any further with it. And everybody walks in. We walk into the Commonwealth's attorney's office. A sheriff was downstairs, and he just looked at us like, what the heck is going on? Didn't say anything, like, what the heck is going on? We get on the elevator, we ride up to Eric Olson's office, and when we got there, his secretary opens the door, and she says, okay, you'll have to cut the audio and video equipment off. Mr. Butler can stay, but everybody else has to leave. Eric Olson comes out once the media left, takes me into his office, and I told him, I said, "You underestimated me, didn't you? Mr. Butler, we're working on it." I said, "Show me that you're working on it." He gets up. No, he didn't. He sent his assistant out, and his assistant comes back with a folder with about 3 or 4 pages in it. Now, I know better. If you're working on a homicide case, you're going to, the folder's going to be, of some size and substance. And he said, well, here's the case. I'm telling you, we're working on it, and we're close. Mr. Butler, you didn't have to bring it. I said, yes, I did. I needed to bring the news. I said, because you weren't doing anything. He is going to take a plea bargain. And I said, he's going to take a plea bargain on a 30-year-old case? They said, yeah. He said he's going to take a plea bargain. And I was really happy. I mean, a 30-year-old case is hard to prove. And he said, yeah, he's going to take a plea bargain. And he asked me, what did I expect for him to get? I said, a minimum of 25 years. And he said, Mr. Butler, you're too easy. He said he's going to get a lot more than that, a lot more than that. But he told me at that point, he said, I don't have control of what he gets. He said, that's up to the judge. He said, but he's going to get a lot more than that. So we went to court, and an attorney by the name of Sandra Parks and Ryan Fitzgerald worked on the case, and they were constantly calling me, giving me updates, telling me what they were doing. They did a fantastic job, and when they finished, the judge said, okay, well, I'm going to step away. I'm going to go into my chamber, and I'll come back out, and I'll announce the sentence. When he came back out, he said, now, I don't want any outbursts. I don't want anybody to say anything. I'm going to give you the maximum amount of time that I could give you. He said, because you've shown that you're not fit to be in society. And he gave him 40 years. I said, yes. And everybody looked at me.
One of the things Derek would frequently tell me is that he wanted this case to close for his mother. But I always go back to, I don't think another detective could have been able to put this stuff together the way that Mike did.
Some personal things that happened in my life that, I do get connected to the families because
she, by all accounts, this was a woman who was doing well in life, enjoying life, and then to have her be murdered the way she was, the impact on the family, and I think on that community too, was severe. I will go back to this. Derek kept this case in the spotlight. He really did. So good for him. He loved his sister clearly. He was devastated by this. And Derek is a likable guy, you know what I mean? So we never really got, and to the, I would think the investigators, you can ask Mike, feel the same way, that if somebody's putting the case out there in the public arena, the public eye, getting attention, there's a much greater chance that some information might wiggle free.
I think it's just human nature that, you hear it, you feel bad for the family, but, the next day you forget about it and you move on. But one of the things that Pam said to me, and this was years ago, and I don't remember, probably 20 years before she went missing, she said, we both like to watch the crime shows. Mm-hmm. And she said, Derek, we were talking about a case that was 50 years old, and they actually found the guy that killed the lady and locked him up. And we were just talking, never thinking that something would happen. She said, Derek, if something ever happens to me, She said, make sure you don't stop looking until you find out what happened. It is that. It happens, yeah.